Hi, everyone. I'm grateful to be here with you today and honored to kind of see new faces and faces I know, so that's great. My name is Megan. Just a little bit about me because this is not the normal environment I'm in, so I'm super excited to be here. I spent 15 years in K-12 education in a tiny rural mountain town, which meant I taught math, science, English, health, and drama. And for those of you who also teach in small towns, you get what I'm saying. And then I felt really compelled to go back to school to study one thing, which was I had all these young people in my classroom, as you can imagine, in a small rural town, under-resourced, who I felt tremendously well prepared to teach them lessons about math or English or science. I felt way less prepared to meet their needs, the needs they were bringing into the classroom every day. So I actually went back to school to just put my head around, like, how do we build the best possible, and at that time, I was thinking school environment. So how do we build the best possible school environment for all these kids, despite all the needs they're coming in with? After that, I got involved. So I went to West Virginia University. Any Mountaineers in the room? No? Okay. Just trying. But anyway, I went to West Virginia University to study this, and as many of you know, West Virginia is known as sort of the opioid epicenter of the nation's opioid crisis. And so immediately went to work in many kinship families and also many other families struggling with substance use at some degree, and started thinking about prevention really outside of the school and into the community. And so that's kind of where I come here today. I moved to Idaho to raise my own child, and so thank you for being that beautiful place where we got to raise her. And then when I got here, I like to be very place-based, and I have to be engaged with young people. It's just a thing I have. And so I started talking to everybody I could, every prevention committee, every youth thing I could get my hands on across the state. I just sat and listened, and over and over and over again I heard, we are suffering from a behavioral health crisis in this state. We need help in this space. And so for me, my life experience sort of clicked, right? So I had this notion that we could build communities to be great for kids. I had this understanding through learning about the Icelandic prevention model in the substance use space. What if we were able to bring that really successful model for substance use prevention into mental health prevention? And so how do we kind of promote the best possible places for kids? And so that's where I come to you today. In 2020, I founded Communities for Youth, which is a statewide organization really looking at moving our communities into better serving kids' needs, so we just have less mental health challenge, less substance use, less violence on the other side. So I'm a teacher, and once a teacher, you can't go back. So those of you who were raised in teacher world with me, you know essential questions are how you start a lesson. And so the essential questions we'll kind of talk about today are, why is it important to think beyond the individual level to promote youth well-being? I think often we think one kid is struggling, and so we're going to figure out everything going on with this kid, which is great, but we also know that there are lots of things outside of that one individual kid that impact that person. Experience, their mental health challenges, etc. The other thing we're going to talk about is what is the state of youth mental health in Idaho. So the work we do with Communities for Youth across the state, we are looking at this problem and trying to get our hands around it. And then finally, how can you contribute to well-being for young people beyond individual level action? Because I think sometimes when we talk about these big things, people in the foster care system, people foster parenting, right? There's all sorts of demands placed on us. And so I think we get kind of overwhelmed and we get myopic, and I do it too, right? We just sit and we're like, okay, I'm going to do the thing that helps my small sphere. And so what I'm going to ask of us is, how do we widen our scope? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So we'll just start with parents today. The challenges are great for us, right? So young people are facing a lot in today's context. You name it, they've got it. Substance use, mental health crisis, unstable economy, loneliness epidemic, chronic absenteeism, academic underachievement, social media and info overload, high rates of violence, unsupported families, unmatched competition and pressure. And if you add foster parent in front of parents there, the burden is even greater. And so the challenge is for parents are great, and here's some of my favorite recent headlines just to normalize any of you who are parents or have made it through parenting. Today's parents, exhausted, burned out, and perpetually behind. Surgeon General's warning, parenting may be hazardous to your health. right? And in fact, in the first time of measuring this in data, we found that parenting is now both a mental and physical health risk for you. So it's a risk factor, y'all. Sorry for those of you who already went there. This one's my favorite. Is parenting the new smoking? They're finding out that smoking 15 cigarettes a day is equivalent to being a parent. So this is a bummer. And so this is where I meet you today, just acknowledging there are so many demands placed on parents. And again, if we extend that to foster parents, the demands are even greater. So being an adult right now, even if you aren't a parent, but you care about kids, right, can often feel like playing whack-a-mole, right? It's one thing after the other. It's that substance use. It's sexting, right? Now it's social media. You got to learn everything about that. Now you got to learn about fentanyl. Uh-oh, Tide Pods. Did anybody predict that? I didn't. I was working with teenagers actively and never knew they would think about eating Tide Pods as a pastime, right? And so all these things happen, and what we do, because we are wonderful people who care about kids, is we are furiously whacking every head that comes out, right? We gotta learn everything we can about fentanyl. We gotta learn everything we can about sexting and social media, and it's so much. It's so much. And the thing about whack-a-mole is that that game is literally set up so that you fail, right? They do not want you winning tickets, right? Because then they have to give you something. They want you to keep putting money in. And this is where we are at as adults in society who care about kids. Many of us are at full capacity overload. Because if we continue to chase every single crisis, right? Suicide crisis, mental health crisis, fentanyl crisis, we're all tired, and we're not necessarily doing what it needs to do to change the actual problem. So I don't like to stay in the problem space, so I promise we're going to be in the problem space for a minute, and then we're going to move forward, because staying here doesn't help us, and it doesn't help kids. But the fact of the matter is about youth mental health in the state, why we began this work, is that Idaho ranks among the highest in the nation for youth depression and suicide rates. And this is true, y'all, long since before COVID, right? Decades long, Idaho is in the bottom. Right? So there is something specific and important for us to learn about what's going on in Idaho for young people's mental health. The next thing I'll say is that just by nature of being a young person, they are particularly vulnerable to mental health challenges. Add that the experience of being a foster young person who probably, as the earlier speaker said, has experienced trauma, right? So you're at this very vulnerable time of teenagehood just by the way that your brain is developing, and you're adding experiences of trauma before and lots of instability, as Terry described. The other thing that I like to kind of highlight for folks is that young girls have the highest rates of experiencing violence, sadness, and suicidal ideation in the history of us monitoring it in this country. This is, I'm talking 10 to 14-year-old girls, right? And so when we think about, again, that across our whole population and then focused in on foster care young people, those young women and young men are very vulnerable in this stage of life. I will just kind of level set, because some of those are factoids about the whole nation or maybe the whole world, right? But here in Idaho, one of the things that Communities for Youth does is we go in and we collect data. We collect data on how, from young people themselves, and to date, we've collected from over 35,000 young people living in Idaho, so lots of folks, right? And what we found in 2023, when we started getting more and more participants, is that depressive symptoms are higher than the national average for Idaho teens. And you can see this chart breaks out 7th through 12th graders, and the boys are the turquoise and the girls are the orange. And I think you guys can see it from wherever you are in the room. Just so you know, the national average is 18 to 20%, depending on the metric you're looking at. So you are seeing rates well above that in Idaho. So again, if we're going to work on something, let's do it. So here I give you, I know I keep re-traumatizing the parents in the room, and I apologize, right? So here are some very messy children, right? And I think when we see these children, and I hand you a Q-tip, some of you, because of the faces you just made, are going to give me some very choice words, right? Some of you are going to throw that Q-tip right back in my face and be like, what do you want me to do with that, right? And some of you, because you are amazing and because you are backbreakers, you are going to furiously try to clean the kids with the Q-tip, right? And the idea is, yes, of course the Q-tip will clean some paint off those children. But we all know those children. They've already painted their faces. So while you are furiously Q-tipping one side of their face, what are they doing with their other hand? Yeah, they're grabbing that paint, they're going again, right? And so the idea is sometimes the way we treat the mental health or the substance use crisis that we are facing in Idaho and our young people is the Q-tip approach. We do one learning session, or we get coping skills in there, or we try to train someone about something, right? But unfortunately with that is the scope of the solution has to match the scope of the problem, and I just showed you the scope of the problem is great. So let's get out of the problem space and think about what is the real true solution. What we think about is upstream prevention, which is really exciting, because I heard some of our colleagues here today talking about the preventative work they're doing, talking about how we bolster communities. The idea of upstream prevention, for those of you who this is a new term, is about working on the root causes. So what are the things that lead to a family having so much difficulty that they have to let go of a child to another family, right? What are the things that lead to a young person having so much difficulty that they are thinking about suicide? What are those root causes, right? So much of the work we do is not at the root cause level. I'll talk more about what I mean. We also, in upstream prevention, what we try to do is focus on the whole context, not just the individual, right? Because I think a lot of times we see substance use and we say, oh, well, that's an individual making a bad choice. But if we zoom out, we see all the things in their environment that make that choice easier access. And the last thing we try to do in upstream prevention is focus on increasing those protective factors, and I'm going to talk about what those are in a minute, and reducing risk factors at the community level. Because we all live in communities, and just as our team, Monty, Sage, and Casey just helped us see, when communities push in around families and kids, they thrive. Right? When we leave them alone and we say, what can we give them, one off, one training, one thing, we don't actually build that community up. In fact, what we know is that health is across many domains, and you all know this from your own lives, and somehow we often forget and we go back to that individual level, right? But we know that you have some individual temperament, characteristics, etc., but then your mental health can be impacted by the way that you interact or engage with your peers, the way that you interact or engage with your family. Think if you have a big fight with your partner at home, right, that is going to impact the way that you're feeling. Our school environment for young people deeply impacts how they feel mental health and how they can navigate the trauma they experience, and also that community level. So an upstream prevention approach asks us not to focus on the individual, but instead widen out that lens to see all the different layers, because each of you can be, in fact, impactful on many of those layers, actually, for kiddos. The World Health Organization, not to keep harping on this, but they also map out all of the domains, all of those layers of that colorful circle that impact youth mental health. Ultimately, when we talk about protective factors, this is across research globally done for decades and decades. We have known this list. And this is where it's hard, because we know this list and then we forget the list. And we go to like, what training could we give them, right? So here's the list. Every adolescent, no matter their background, no matter their trauma, what they need is a caring relationship with at least one adult. That is why it's so cool to engage our faith communities, because those faith communities are ripe with trusted adults, right? Same with our school providers. How do we get our school teachers, our foster families to be so well capacitated themselves, so regulated themselves, that they can be a safe, trusted adult for our kids? Social support systems. So we need strong families, and strong families don't happen because strong families, right? Strong families happen as a byproduct of strong communities around that family. Strong schools, strong communities. Kids need social competence and life skills. Kids need motivation for lifelong learning, because y'all know it's going faster than any of us can keep up with it, right? And it's going to be fast for them as well. Ability to live with uncertainty and change, and belief in a promising future. This is it. This has been the list forever. And sometimes we get stuck on that crisis. We get stuck in beaten down fentanyl, right? And we forget, if we just did this for every kid, all kids would thrive. The thing about protective factors, which is so beautiful and I think full of so much hope and promise, is that no matter what trauma you have experienced, a protective factor is powerful in changing your trajectory. So a lot of us say, gosh, I don't know how to work with kids who have been traumatized, right? Probably not in this room, but in a lot of the audiences I'm in, right? I don't know how to work in this space. I'm not a mental health provider. What am I supposed to do, right? And the thing is, you can do this. Everybody can do this, even if you don't have your own kids. You can find kids to be a safe, trusted adult for. You can find ways to support families and schools in your community. So when we think about shifting our perspective upstream, which is what I'm asking you to do today, it's actually hard because a lot of us are in this intervention prevention space and we're doing the good work, and it's hard to think about how could we reconsider whether or not we're really changing things. And I'll give you an example. This is my tame example. I won't go to my more risky ones, but this one is the vape detector example. So, for instance, this state spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in vape prevention, and what they did is they put vape detectors in bathrooms. Okay? I want you to think about how that prevents a young person from vaping. Yeah, right? What does a kid have to do in order for a vape detector to work? Yeah, thanks, Sheila. They have to vape in order for a vape detector to work. And we know that vaping is hugely addictive. So we are literally waiting for the problem to start and then calling it prevention. We do the same thing with suicide, right? Oh, let's train everyone to notice the signs of suicide. That's great. I'm not saying that's bad. But if that's the only thing you're doing, you are letting a kid get all the way to suicide ideation before you do anything. That's not really deep prevention work, right? And so this is where I ask people when you're doing your work every day to be like, am I really shifting the root causes, right? What is causing a young person to pick up a vape, right? They're disgusting, right? Right? What is causing a young person to do that? That's where you do prevention. You don't do it as a vape detector in a bathroom, because guess what? You might prevent vaping in that bathroom with a vape detector, but you're not preventing it anywhere else. So one of the things we do, like I said, is we do the Idaho Youth Wellbeing Survey. We're going statewide, y'all. We're going 56 schools deep this year after just doing 9 last year, so we're moving. We're going to have statewide data soon. And here's what's important about having statewide data. We will not just know outcomes. Right now, unfortunately, the status of youth collection in this state around data is atrocious. All we have are emergency department visits, suicide death rates, and mental health crisis rates. We do not have any of the information to move the needle about what are the protective and risk factors leading to those poor outcomes. And so that is what we are trying to do. So our survey collects the risk and protective factors that young people are experiencing at the community level, focused on the very local community, because there are things we can learn about the state for sure, but we all know that each of the communities that we come from are different. They have a different profile, they have different needs, and so that's what we're looking at. We also center on young people, because I love y'all, and y'all do great work for kids, right? But sometimes we come at it from our adult perspective, and we aren't in the kids' experience. We don't know what their true needs are, and so centering what young people are actually experiencing is really important for the conversation. So we ask, what are the key risk and protective factors associated with poor mental health in Idaho's teens? You saw that outcomes bar, right? When we saw how much higher than the national average our teens were at, we were like, oh my goodness, we need to figure out why. Here are the top factors right now across the state that come up in every community we've been in so far. The number one driver for both suicidal ideation and depression is social isolation, the sense of loneliness, right? This is when we don't have the quality and quantity of relationships we need. You remember that thing I showed you just a minute ago that was like, hey, one trusted adult? This is it. So if you are not a parent, right, then this is your role. Find a kid in your life that you can connect with. If you are a parent, you know the number one thing. Stop bopping the alligator heads. Create connection with your kid, whatever it takes. And I know in some of ours, we have very aggressive or hostile relationships built up over time. It's not unrecoverable, right? So what you need to do is just think, how do I connect with this kid? And sometimes that looks like, this is why Casey's programs are so fun, like sometimes that looks like just finding fun and joy and not correcting that kid, right? Just being in that space for a little bit. The second number one driver of mental health and suicidal ideation across Idaho's teens is stress levels. Our kids are stressed about the same things we are stressed about. So we need to think about how to help them navigate that challenge, right? When I talk to regularly 12-year-old human beings who are talking about how they have to be excellent at everything they do as a 12-year-old because there is no way they're going to get into a good college because they can't afford it, so they better be busting now because they're going to have to get a scholarship, and otherwise they're not going to have any future whatsoever. That's sad. That is hard. That is a heavy burden for a 12-year-old to be holding. They're holding the economic strife that all of the parents are dealing with, but they're holding it in their teenage brains. So this is something where we can start thinking about how we talk about things like college, how we talk about things like stress and the economy. Lack of sleep, oh my goodness, y'all. I don't want to even show you the nasty data on how little sleep our kids are getting. And you know what? I'm looking around the room. I know all of us are also doing pretty poor in this department. But we have like a large majority of teenagers in the state getting less than 7 hours of sleep. High school recommendation is 8 to 10 hours, middle school 9 to 11 hours of sleep a night. So we are not hitting that mark. And the more and more we learn about sleep, the more we know how important it is to emotional regulation, right? What we've been talking about all day today. And then the fourth leading cause is lack of emotional support from family. And this is where I think this audience knows this more than the other audience I speak to often, which is this is not families saying, I don't want to be a good family. This is families tapped out of capacity, out of ability to regulate their own emotions, out of ability to connect yet another resource, to find yet another resource, right? And this is where, again, the kind of work that we've heard about today, where we pull together as a community, what can I be doing? How can I help these families? I think the work around connecting those two different pools of people is so beautiful, and I'm really excited about it. I'll show you what we mean when we say social isolation is driving depression. So this is a chart, and I know some of you are not graph people. I already know some social workers, apparently. I was like, I like social work. I can do math. But anyway, Sheila, here is what I'm talking about. So this is a chart that represents all the teenagers in Idaho that participated in our survey, and it's representing two groups of kiddos. On the left-hand bar, you're seeing low social isolation. So these were kids that said, I am not lonely, right? I have the quality and quantity of relationships I need in my life. That's awesome, and we want to see so many kids in that bucket. And then the bar on the right is representing kids who said, I am extremely lonely. I do not have support either in my family bucket, in my school bucket, in my peers bucket, right? These are kids that are lonely. The yellow bar with the percentage represents how many kids in that group were also at a clinical level of depression. And so you can see why we're like, hey, y'all, if we do anything in Idaho, let's work on this connection thing, right? Because this is a huge difference. Kids who are not lonely, only 5% of those kids are scoring at a clinical level of depression. You go to kids who are lonely, 78% of them, y'all. So this is where knowing those risk and protective factors becomes so important because, of course, we can say mental health is a crisis. How do we ever start? What do we ever do, right? I would say this is a pretty good navigational tool, right? Even if we just got this right for kids, even just in every single one of our local communities, we made sure every kid had connection. We would be able to bring down our depression rates. Because you can see, if we changed high social isolation kiddos, we could bring down 78% of our clinical depression in this state, which is incredible. So one of my soapbox items that Roger has heard me say a lot, is that if you're not going to leave with anything else, you can focus on youth social connection. And if you're like, I don't have a youth in my life, what am I supposed to do? There's lots of ways you can get involved. It sounds like you could go join one of the foster care fun events. Those are really fun. There was a baseball game, too, recently. That was pretty fun. But anyway, or you can figure out, maybe it's your church community. Could you volunteer at the youth group, right? If you do have a kid and your kid's on the soccer team, instead of just cheering your own kid on, after the game, make a point to make eye contact with one other kid and be like, wow, Johnny, that was an incredible kick, right? It's so easy to make kids feel like they matter, and we just whiff it. And then sometimes I think we're in this weird place in society where we think talking to other people's kids is weird. We got to fix that, because our kids are lonely. They need us to notice them. They need us to know that they matter. If you're thinking a little deeper about how do I create connection, we have 3 pillars of connection that young people need based on the evidence. One is connection to self. This one we miss a lot. So we don't really think about that self being such a huge part of how we can connect. But kids, in order to share themselves authentically, need to authentically know themselves, right? So one of the ways that we can do this is by offering them lots of exploration of possibilities. What could you be? What are some role models that you might want to resonate with, right? We can think about their purpose, and I don't mean what do you want to be when you grow up. I mean, who do you want to be when you grow up, right? Do you want to be someone that inspires people? Do you want to be someone that makes people laugh? What do you want to do? That's cool. Having those conversations with them can be really powerful. We want them to have autonomy and competence. I know this is tricky, especially right now, y'all. Society is weird. We went from helicopter parents, right? Some of us are aware of those. Those are the ones that are just hovering, to what we call snowplow parents, which are like, no bad thing will happen to my child ever. Right? The problem with that is they get into college, Sheila and I know, we're both undergraduate professors, they get into college and they have no idea how to handle any business whatsoever because no one has allowed them to go through and move through challenge. Kids need to be alone sometimes. Kids need free time running around the neighborhood with their other friends, and you are way more dangerous making your kid sit at home on a screen than letting your kid bum around the neighborhood with their other friends. So this is something that's happened recently where parents are kind of either too busy or too worried about what's out there that we don't let our kids just go explore it. And they've got to do it. It's good for their development, it's good for their knowledge of self, and it's good for their connection to others. The second kind of pillar here is connection to peers. And this is funny because when you tell people that, they're like, yeah, we always let kids connect. No, we have to help them build those skills, right? We have to help them scaffold what that looks like because we can't just throw a bunch of teenagers in a room and be like, all right, connect. Right? Because most of them are going to go, oh gosh, I'm so awkward, I'm just going to stare at my phone, because that's what the social norm is. So we have to scaffold that. Maybe we create an activity where they have to meet other people. Maybe we give them questions to ask each other at the beginning, right? So as the adults, we take responsibility, we help scaffold that. Connection to safe, trusted adults, we've talked about this a lot, but one of the things that a lot of parents who we engage with in our network ask is like, gosh, like we always get into it. You know, I'm trying really hard to connect with my kid and I'm always just stepping on it and then we're fighting 5 minutes later, right? And so the idea is lead with listening, don't try to solve. And y'all, I've been doing this work a long time and it is hard for me to remember this with my own child, so normalizing that, right? But the idea is it's actually beautiful when you remember to do it because it's really hard when a kid is going through something hard and you want to solve it, right? Oh gosh, what advice do I give them? What do I tell them to do? How do I navigate this for them? If you just say, actually it's better for my kid if I just listen, whew, right? Then you can really just listen. You don't have to solve anything for them. And it's such a cool shift. And what we talk to, even with our teenagers who engage with us on other work, is that is what is necessary for them. They feel connected with you just because you're actively listening. You don't have to give them any advice. You don't have to solve anything for them. And it's actually kind of a relief. This also helps people who are like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do with a kid that's having a hard time, right? It's cool. Just be next to them. Just ask them questions. Notice kids, like we talked about with Johnny on the soccer team, notice them. And then role model positive coping. So our kids right now get a lot of input from media. And a lot of the ways in which they're taught to cope from other teenagers on the internet or on TV is through drinking, right? Or through acting out. That's just because it's a dramatic storyline, right? But that's not really positive coping. And so as parents, we can model that. Gosh, I'm frustrated today. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call up 3 of my friends. I'm going to hang out because that's fun, right? Gosh, I'm frustrated today. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put on the funniest, like most peppy music I can and just be a weirdo for 5 minutes, and that's going to help me. Those kind of small things can help young people shift into, okay, I'm with a safe adult. They're regulating. That's normal. This is how we do this. So I will leave you with 3 things that can promote well-being for youth in Idaho. One is increasing protective factors for young people. Like social connection, but if that's not your bag, hey, help us work on stress. Centering young people's needs. The next thing I'll say, and this is a little soapboxy moment for me, which is we need to take responsibility as adults for young people's environments. They do not have control over the community they're born in, right? They do not have control over the contextual factors that are around them, over the fighting that all the adults around them are doing. They don't have control over that. It is our responsibility as adults to create that environment for them. And so I would say, in whatever way you can, please help us take responsibility. We have this onslaught in society right now of peer-to-peer programs. And again, don't hear me wrong, peer-to-peer programs are great. But if the only solution we're giving kids is, hey, solve it for each other, guys, help each other come out of that suicidal crisis on your own, guys, that is not okay. We are the adults. We are responsible for their environment. So I ask you to build your community where you are. And then finally, collecting this community-specific data can really help us to hone in and navigate. Once we get connection, y'all, I can't wait to do the next one, right? Because we're going to know what's going on for kids, what do they need in that moment, real time. And as a state, we can deal with that, but really as our individual, unique communities that are engaging in this work, they can deal with it. And that's where it's really beautiful. So I'll leave you with, our children are worth running upstream for. And remember, we don't have to play the whack-a-mole game. Thank you so much. I can answer questions if you want. I got 4 minutes. Go. Yes. I told Roger he could be my hype man, and he did it. Thank you, Roger. I know this isn't a questions audience, but I really do love questions if you want to know. Okay, thanks, y'all.